Jeffrey Sachs, which is a symbolic day because it's Easter Friday. And we give importance to this meeting in a sense of symbolism. Today, as you know, is one rare day in which all Easter of different religions coincide. And I thought convenient that we would ask somebody with a very distinguished diplomatic career who is now representing the Sovereign Order of Malta on the Holy Seat. Because the Sovereign Order of Malta was born as a military order, and now it's become a philanthropic order. So in this passage from military action to philanthropic action, we see something which has to do with the sense of this meeting that is held by the University for Peace of the United Nations, of which I've been named the representative for Italy. I will have to tell you that the University for Peace was founded by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 980. In 982, Italy subscribed the agreement with the University for Peace of the United Nations. And then, just last year, in October, the General Assembly approved a resolution signed by 133 countries, among which Russia, China, United States, and Italy, which presented the idea of opening a faculty on artificial intelligence for peace. Because right now, nearly 73% of the cost of practical use of artificial intelligence are for war. And then what remains, practically nothing is really take peace as a central element. On the contrary, the American government has dismantled the Institute for Peace, and peace is not any longer a point of reference in the international debate. We are all talking about rearmament, continuation of conflict, solution of conflict, which look still very distant. So the Faculty of Artificial Intelligence should be a faculty which teaches what is the sense of peace, which is not the absence of war. It's a way of looking at society and international relations, a way of looking the way in which you relate to the world, to yourself, to your friends, to your family, to your society, to the world. And that philosophy is what we would like to teach using the Faculty on Artificial Intelligence in a transversal way, which will go from food security to human security, different sense of security, which are beyond the military security, which cannot be the only point of security in our world. Climate must be a security. There are so many things that are transversal. So for this reason, I would like to introduce to you Jeffrey Sachs. I don't think we can make an introduction because he's well known by all of you. He is one of the few activists who are traveling worldwide without rest to stimulate debate and ideas about several issues which go from global governance, how to review the system of global governance to make it more inclusive and participatory, to the issue of international relations based on principle of sustainability and all other issues which have to do with democracy. And as an economist, of course, he looks to the issue of social justice and the theory which are now spreading up its application in this wave which is coming across the world on view of a very, I would call not neoliberal, but certainly an extreme application of the Austrian School of Economy. And I thought it convenient that beside my task of receiving you as the host and welcoming you and thanking you for coming here, I would ask to somebody which is more distinguished with his career than me. We are talking of Ambassador Zanardi Landi, who was in a long career. He was in very important posts all over the world. He was in Tehran, in Ottawa, in London, and then as chief of mission in Belgrade, in the Holy City, ambassador to the Holy City, and then he went in different places, but he was also ambassador in Moscow, which was a very important experience. Then he became Secretary General of the European University, which is a main place of teaching and thinking. And then he finally concluded his career by becoming the diplomatic advisor of the President of the Republic, both of Napolitano and Mattarella. And he is accustomed to be a very active part in the international community. He also has acted as in his private world as advisor of important companies. The last one now is Pirelli. So he joins his diplomatic career with the ability to understand the economic world. And now he is, as I told you before, he is the ambassador of the Sovereign Order of Malta to the Holy See. So he represents in this symbolic day of Friday Easter the relation, the passage with Holy See, but also the passage from an order which was born as a military body into a body now for peace and philanthropy. That said, I will give the floor to Jeffrey. He will make an introduction, about 25-30 minutes. Then Ambassador Zanardi takes over the moderation of the meeting. I would beg you, please don't take more than 10 minutes, because we would like to give the floor. And don't forget that there are now about 100 and some participants online, some of which already asked the floor. Like Riccardo Petrella, who is a very important economist that you all know. So Ambassador will have to find a way to give floor to as many people as possible, and this needs your cooperation. If we were a robot, and this would be a conference by artificial intelligence, we would say 7 minutes and nobody would speak more than 7 minutes. But we are in human intelligence and a subcategory of Latin human intelligence, which is not exactly conducive to the sense of time. So I give the floor to Jeff, and I wish to Ambassador Zanardi a good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, everybody, for coming together also on Good Friday. Quite a time for us to meet and to discuss. There are many ways to describe the time that we're in right now. One that I have found useful is an expression that was repeated by my teacher at Harvard University, the great scientist Edward Wilson, a great biologist and evolutionary expert who passed away a couple of years ago. But he used to say frequently that we have entered the 21st century with our Stone Age emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technologies. And his emphasis was that we are completely out of synchrony. The technologies run ahead to the point where they transform the world and could end the world. The institutions that we have to deal with this are centuries old, and in many cases centuries behind what is needed. And our instinctual reactions, because he was an evolutionary psychologist and an evolutionary biologist, most importantly, is that our instinctive and emotional reactions were formed on the African savanna probably about 100,000 years ago. And so we're not exactly equipped for all that we face day to day, and we don't get this right. And so Professor Wilson emphasized the lack of synchrony. I think many of us are looking to Gramsci and his famous quotation, which has been repeated several times in other news recently, including in a piece that I posted and others as well, when Gramsci wrote in his prison notebooks in 1930, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appears." And so Gramsci talked about the fact that we were in an interregnum. And I think that this is also a correct way to understand where we are in the world, though which interregnum and on the way to what, of course, is the great mystery. There are, in my view, several fundamental disruptions that are simultaneously occurring. Some are good, some are maybe neutral, and some are quite terrifying. Perhaps the one that I would start with is an economic observation. Broadly, we are in what we could call an economic age of convergence, meaning that poorer countries are catching up with richer countries. This is a positive development. It's, from an economic development point of view, the most fundamental development. What it means in practice is that while Europe and the United States have economic growth measured conventionally by the annual change of the gross domestic product of maybe 1% or 2% or no percent growth, the developing countries have economic growth of 4 or 5% per year on average. China was growing economically. Again, this is defined as the rate of change of the GDP at about 10% per year for 40 years, up until around 2020. And India today grows at about 6% per year. And I mention India because it's the most populous country in the world, with about 18% of the world population. If you spend time in Asia, you don't feel at all the kind of angst and pessimism and alarm that you feel in Rome or New York or throughout the United States or throughout Europe. You feel something very different, which is a lot of dynamism, a lot of change, rising living standards, and so forth. So this is the first disruption, a very positive one. in my opinion. The growth of developing countries does not mean the decline of the West. The West meaning the high-income North Atlantic world of Europe and the United States. It just means that the exceptionalism of the West is narrowing rapidly. Maybe one could say even over. So that's the first. Along with that is a massive geopolitical change. And this, of course, we feel daily, and this is part of our drama and part of our Stone Age emotions. China experienced 10% per year economic growth for 40 years. The arithmetic is very simple. When you grow at a certain rate X, the time that it takes to double whatever you're growing is 70 divided by X. So if you grow at 10% per year, the time to double is 7 years. The Chinese economy was doubling in size. That is, the measure of gross domestic product was doubling every 7 years for more than 35 years. I mentioned 35 because 7 into 35 is 5 doublings. 5 doublings is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. It's a 32-time increase. The Chinese economy increased more than 30 times in scale over the period from 1980 to 2020. My wife, who's somewhere here, unless she's, oh, there she is. Okay. My wife and I visited China first in 1981 at a time that China had just come out of its Cultural Revolution. It was impoverished. There were no private vehicles anywhere, dusty streets, some bicycles, and a lot of poverty. That was 1981. Today, China has more than 100 gleaming cities of more than 1 million people, and some more than 10 million people. And a couple of weeks ago, we were in a city of 30 million people, Shenzhen, which was 25,000 people in 1980, and now is 30 million in its metropolitan area today, and is probably the most dynamic center of technology in the whole world, even beating out Silicon Valley, arguably. So this is leading to massive geopolitical change. If I could put it in psychiatric terms, the United States is having a profound neurotic reaction to this. The idea that there is a competitor, and maybe not just a competitor, but a competitor that is larger, more powerful, with a dynamic society and dynamic economy, is completely terrifying to the American psyche, which thought that it was alone as a ruler of the world, as all hegemons have believed, and that this was something permanent, and this is over. So the economic convergence is leading to new geopolitics. And the dominant geopolitics of our time is the US confronting a powerful China. And we see this playing out literally by the hour now in this so-called economic war or trade war. This trade war is a neurotic reaction of a very neurotic president, by the way, to the rise of China. And it's very dangerous, and it is not atypical in history. It was like the rivalry 125 years ago between a rising Germany and Britain, that, of course, ultimately remarkable scientific and technological breakthroughs since 1936, since Turing invented the concept of universal computation. And you can mark the peaks of genius along the way, including John von Neumann and the architecture of the modern computer, including Shockley and Bardeen, and the discovery of the transistor in 1947, including the design of the integrated circuit in 1959, and on and on. And then what became Moore's law, that the transistors packed onto those integrated circuits could double in every 18 months in its area, on a given area on an integrated chip. And with all of those doublings, we've had billions-fold increase of computation. The US Defense Department developed the internet idea in the 1970s as a project to keep computers connected in a nuclear war. This was another brilliant invention that built on many brilliant American-led insights, actually, because I want to give credit to my country on some things because it's such a disaster on so many other things. But the United States really did largely create the digital world after 1945 with the transistor onward. It was an American creation to a very significant extent. And it turns out that the combination of computation and integrated circuits and all of the technology and the wonders of an idea from 1955 of a neural net, and then building artificial intelligence, starting with one layer of neutrons called a perceptron, and now millions of layers, or I should say billions actually of parameters in neural networks, is giving us the AI breakthroughs of recent years and days even, that are absolutely astounding, of tremendous fundamental economic, political, geopolitical, and military significance, and I would say largely out of control, like the many other advanced technologies of modern times, including nuclear weapons and including biotechnology. So we have wondrous technologies that can do wondrous things, but they are essentially not governed for the good in almost any case. They're governed for two reasons primarily. One is for military use, and the other is to make a lot of money. And that has been true for all of the advances of technology. And this is very dangerous. Our militaries are not very clever, and they're not very good at keeping us out of disaster. And to put these godlike technologies in the hands of the military, which they are, or the security state, is extremely, extremely dangerous. And that's where they reside right now. So that's the third dimension of fundamental disruption. And the fourth, which is as large as these three, as the economic, the geopolitical, and the technological, is the environmental. Of course, it gets perhaps the least attention day to day, but what we are doing to the planetary systems is profoundly dangerous and disruptive, and would pose by itself a first-order challenge for governance beyond anything that our governments have ever accomplished before, because it would require global-scale cooperation on a consistent basis for decades to change our technological parameters of our infrastructure in a way to keep the planet safe for the 8 going to 10 billion people that live on the planet. And that, of course, is the drama of climate change. That's the drama of biodiversity loss. That's the drama of ecosystems collapsing. That's the drama of fisheries collapsing. That's the drama of fundamental pollution in air, water, soils, and the oceans, disrupting the entire biosphere and our own bodies as well as part of that. And this is, I would say, the fourth major disruptor. And just to say, we have a president who not only does not understand one iota of what I just said about any of this, but is deliberately trying to smash any institutions that would address it as somehow hostile to making as much money as possible as he reaches, the next years of his government. So when you add this up, the economic changes, the geopolitical changes, the technological changes, the environmental changes, it's a very unusual, unprecedented, and dangerous time. I should say one thing about technology, just to add to my sense of the drama. I put it, of course, probabilities in a Bayesian sense, meaning subjective probabilities are subjective, but I put it at more than 99% probability that COVID was created in a US laboratory, specifically at the University of North Carolina, and that this is one of those examples of technology that is completely out of hand. And incidentally, while I may or may not be right about this, what I am right about is that all the evidence has been suppressed by the CIA and by the security agencies, so that finding out exactly what happened requires a considerable amount of sleuthing, which some brave people have done, and a considerable amount, unfortunately, of guesswork still that makes these issues difficult to know with complete certainty, to say the least. So this is our situation right now. And let me then say a few words about what all of this means for our daily lives and politics. What it should mean is that we face major challenges that should be addressed systematically. So if I've described the situation adequately, or even remotely adequately, this poses very practical challenges at the global scale. And my sense, having worked on this for 45 years now, is that I'm rather accurate in this basic assessment, and that therefore we face major governance issues so that we are not wrecked by global war, that we are not overtaken by reckless biotechnology, that we are not destroyed in a nuclear war, and that we are not upended by human-induced environmental disaster. So that's all a major governance challenge, a profound one. It happens to be a global governance challenge because all the issues that I've discussed are not particular to any country, to any region, to any part of the world, to any single ecosystem. They're all global scale. So my view and my professional orientation is that you identify these global problems and then you looked to how they could be effectively addressed. And governance is fundamental because there is nothing in anything that I've described that makes market outcomes or decentralized actions or bottom-up choices or cultural choices or business choices in any way remotely adequate to face this class of problems. These are political problems fundamentally, but they're political problems at a global scale. Of course, they involve from the local city to metropolitan areas, to states, to regions, to national governments, to supranational scale like the European Union, to the global scale. All scales are relevant in the governance of these issues, but fundamentally there needs to be global governance to address these issues. So I've spent the last 26 years of my life working for the United Nations, volunteering for the United Nations to try to support the global governance that's needed for this, starting with Kofi Annan in 1999 to help each of the secretaries general since then. The problem, of course, is our global governance is extraordinarily weak. It itself is an invention that's no more than 2 centuries old. We had almost no global institutions other than the church, perhaps, and the Jesuits within the church, perhaps for a while. Other than that, we had no global institutions until the International Postal Union and some early attempts at public health regulation in the middle of the 19th century. We had no even conception of a global governance institution until the failed League of Nations, which started in 1921. And we're in the second attempt at global governance with the United Nations, which is in its 80th birthday today, or this year, I should say. It doesn't work. It's not keeping the peace, doesn't have the power that it needs. It's not effective. I still devote 24/7 to it because I can't think of anything else. There is no replacement, so my view is that it needs to be strengthened. It needs to be understood as vital for our survival. It needs to be empowered in a number of ways. It needs to be legitimized more powerfully with the new bodies and new governance structures. It needs to be fundamentally reformed. I don't believe we're going to solve the problems that we have without effective global governance. And so this is something that we can discuss. In the meantime, what we have is still a world largely driven in its core political power at the national level, in the image that Europe made the world, in the so-called Westphalian world. This is a little bit of a simplistic gloss, but in political science, we talk about the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648 as being the birth of modern sovereignty, and that the world effectively is organized as 193 sovereign countries that maybe loosely cooperate with each other at times. They can sign some treaties, though the treaties are not enforceable, and so forth. The world is basically governed by nation states, which maintain armies, weapon systems, and tax systems, and they jealously guard against any other level of government, especially global government, having any responsibility for taxes or armaments. And so power, both economic and military, rest at the national level. And we're in that world to an important extent still today. Europe is somewhere trying to make something at a European level, but one can't say it's hugely effective at this stage. It's interesting that the European Union budget is 1% of the GDP of Europe, whereas the budget of any individual European country is about, let me say it again, the European Union budget is 1% of the European-wide GDP, whereas the budget of any nation like Italy is 40% of GDP or higher. So the tax power and the spending power continues to reside at the national level, even after almost 70 years now of European governance, starting with the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Still, Europe is essentially a nation state level. And all of the weaknesses that we see today in diplomacy, in defense, in economic policy, in technology policy for Europe show that even reaching a European-wide level of governance, much less a global level of governance, is extraordinarily difficult. So just to say, finding a way to global governance is perhaps delusional on my part, but the problems are coming that way. They're coming at that scale. We would say that the public goods and public bads are global public goods and global public bads, not national level public goods and public bads. So you don't get to choose at what level you have to face the problem. But our institutions are medieval institutions. They're not 21st century institutions that align with the actual challenges that we have. The specifics, and I'll close here, of our situation are the following. We had 200 years of European ascendancy relative to Asia from around 1500 to 1700. And we had about 300 years of European and Western, including US, dominance of Asia from 1700 until 2000. Maybe you could date it a little bit differently. Maybe it's better to say European ascendancy from 1500 to 1800 and European dominance from 1800 to 2000, including the US as a quasi, very weird European country, but still having some attributes of Europeanness to it because it was run by European descent and institutions. And what has happened because of the rise of China in particular, but more generally this economic convergence, is that the Western rule over the world is over. And it ended sometime around 30 or 40 years ago, in fact. That wasn't recognized for a long time. The United States still presumed that it ran the world until basically now, I would say, although Trump shows glimmers of awareness that he's only the underworld chief of his part of the world and that there are others that he has to confront. But in any event, the idea was that the West ran the world, and from roughly 1800 to 1914, Britain ran the show primarily, and from 1914 to 1945, there was unending disaster. And then from 1945 onward, the US ran the show. And that was the basic idea. And the US really believed its own headlines that it did run the show and that it does run the show until today. So what we have is very weak global institutions and power still resting at the nation state level primarily. And now the country that presumed to dominate the world, the United States no longer in any position to rule the world, determine the future of the world, and so forth. This has brought about many morbid reactions, like Gramsci said. So this is the time that we're seeing the morbid symptoms appear, and Donald Trump is a morbid symptom of this. We are in a period of a downward collapse of American governance, ruled by ignorance and by emergency decree. So this is the worst governance that America has experienced in its history, at least since the 1850s, which was the prelude to the US Civil War. So this is a pretty bad period. And it's a very unpredictable period because our institutions are not working like they're supposed to. If you read the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that tariffs are the responsibility of Congress, not the responsibility of the President of the United States. So Donald Trump is setting our whole trade policy unilaterally as not just national unilateralism, but as one person. Even England, which we revolted against, mad King George III, actually governed with the Commons, but Trump governs without Congress at all. And so we're in a period, it's short, it's only been from January 20th until today, we're in a one-person rule right now. And one-person rule is very unpredictable and very unstable, and the policies sometimes change by the hour. How does the president rule personally? Because he invokes a word that appears scattered throughout the post-World War II security state legislation, and that is emergency. The president rules by emergency decree. So all of the trade policy of the last weeks is by emergency decree. What is the emergency? Well, at one point it was fentanyl. At another point it was trade deficits. It's, in other words, a complete figment of the imagination of the White House that declares an emergency. And if you look at the website of the White House, which is worth looking at, go to whitehouse.gov and then go to executive orders and read any of them. They all start the same way: by the powers invested in me as President of the United States, I declare the following emergency. And then he cites the emergency legislation. So this is one-person rule. It's extremely dangerous. I'll stop there.
The other news motto is voices against the tide. And I think that nobody could do it better than our friend Jeffrey Sachs. And I'm very grateful to Roberto Savio for having decided to invite him tonight. I cannot, Roberto very imprudently mentioned the Order of Malta, and I cannot abstain for my little advertisement spot. The Order of Malta is a medieval institution, which Jeffrey was mentioning, but is still alive after almost 1,000 years. It's reverted to the previous mission, and now is only healthcare and refugees and trying to to repair people struck by wars, and is knowing a second youth because the demand of services is increasing. We have around the world 54, I think, armed conflicts, and all that needs some help.
And I'm very proud to say, I will keep it very short, I'm very proud to say that the Order of Malta arrived with food to Gaza before any other European country, which was quite incredible. That's all for the Order of Malta. So now my task is simply to receive questions and to give the floor to the ones who would like to say something. I would like to call Senator De Priamo, who has a video message before the others. How can we do it?
The technical room will take care of that.
Good.
Are you ready?
Carissimi, dear all, it is a great honor to welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs, one of the world's leading economists and a distinguished professor at Columbia University, here in Rome for this special conference on geopolitics and Europe. His presence offers us a unique opportunity to reflect deeply on the role of Europe in today's complex and rapidly changing global landscape. In a world marked by growing economic inequalities, environmental crises, and social unrest, Europe is called upon to reaffirm its values of peace, cooperation, and sustainability. Professor Sachs has long been a visionary voice on these critical issues, and his insights are especially valuable as we seek to navigate the challenges of our time with responsibility and foresight. We thank the University for Peace and all those who made this event possible, including Ambassador Roberto Savio and Antonio Zanardi Landi. May today's dialogue be not only inspiring, but also a call to action for all of us committed to a more just, equitable and peaceful global future. Aggiungo due parole in italiano per dire che nella discussione sulla legge sull'intelligenza artificiale approvata in prima lettura in Senato, siamo riusciti a far approvare un emendamento che chiede, nella strategia complessiva sull'intelligenza artificiale, di applicare e rispettare i principi legati alla tutela dei diritti umani. Ci tengo a sottolineare che questo emendamento, a mia prima firma, approvato in Senato, è frutto di un lavoro e di una riflessione congiunta anche con l'Università della Pace e anche in base a quei principi che ispirano l'azione dell'Università della Pace stessa. E questo credo che sia una soddisfazione. Buon lavoro.
Grazie, Senatore. C'è qualche domanda? Is there any questions for Professor Sachs? Please, could you say your name and introduce yourself? Do you want to come here? Otherwise, other people cannot hear.
So that they can see you on they can hear you on the
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Cecilia Capanna. I've been working with Mr. Savio. I worked for Dr. Savio for many years, and we are friends. So he's my mentor, and I try to make a question because I have been listening to what Mr. Sachs said, and most of all, I thought about the pandemic as a turning point because we all felt like one. We all had the illusion that the world finally became one, and the global problems were felt as problems of every nation, not only problems for this or that other nations, where a lot of talking was spent about how to place money in a decent and smart way, what happened afterwards?
Thank you, Professor Sachs.
You know, it's very interesting. I think people will go back to look at how the pandemic affected different societies. In the US, I would say there was no solidarity at all. There was a brawl. The idea of social distancing or lockdowns was the most political issue imaginable. Some said this is ridiculous. Some said this is our social responsibility. The pandemic deeply divided America and led to a tremendous backlash against the kinds of actions that were taken. Wearing face masks became a very political issue. If you wore a face mask, you were on the left. If you didn't wear a face mask, if you were on the right, you would reject wearing a face mask, this kind of thing. And so it was an extremely polarizing event. Another part of the polarization, though, I mentioned briefly, and that is the origin of the pandemic has never been established. There was no serious attempt to find the origin of the virus at any level. And what I can tell you definitively is that there was an attempt to cover up the origin of the virus in many places that led to a profound degradation of trust and institutions. My own work on this came because I was asked by the Lancet Medical Journal to head a commission to look at how the pandemic should be addressed. And one of the issues also was to look at the origin of the pandemic. And when I took on that job, I listened to some of the leading scientists, and I believed that the pandemic was natural, and that any talk that it came out of a laboratory was just right-wing conspiracy talk. Then I got deeply engaged in this question, including the evidence and of many, many kinds, including the genomic evidence, the experimental evidence, the scientific evidence, and so forth. And I came to the conclusion that I expressed a few minutes ago, that this was a virus deliberately created by a scientist at North Carolina and incidentally sent for testing to Wuhan Institute of Virology for a particular kind of testing. I can't prove this, but what I can tell you is that I lost myself confidence in the scientific community in the United States, which was deeply corrupted in its response. And that I know because various pieces of evidence came out showing that the scientists were saying and writing one thing in public and something quite different in private. That's quite alarming to see, because we look to the scientific community as our bastion of trust in empirical evidence objectively observed, and that failed in the US context, at least in a massive way. So all of this is to say, the pandemic did not, in my country, lead to any kind of new social spirit or trust or sense of commonality or common purpose. It was yet another step on the road to political divide, degradation, polarization, doubt, distrust. And in the United States today, again, sorry to dwell on the US, but it's it is relevant both because of the power of the United States and because it's not different in Europe. The trust in institutions has collapsed. There is no trust in our institutions. The American public holds Congress in complete disrepute. It holds the universities in disrepute. It holds almost every major institution in society in disrepute. And that is, of course, both a symptom and itself a danger. It is the danger that leads to one-person rule, which is what we have now, because we don't have functioning institutions right now that command public support and public trust. So this is just to say that strangely enough, the virus overturned the world for 2 years, but it did not even lead to a post-pandemic reflection in a way to say, oh, we've just gone through a global experience together. Now we see how we depend on each other. Nothing like that. There's no legacy at all except distrust that I see.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Please do.
Yes, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I'm Paul Nemitz. I'm a retired EU principal advisor from the European Commission. I'm German. I have just moved to Rome because my wife is Italian. I'm a principal advisor, retired from the European Commission. Political civil servant. You mentioned 4 great challenges on which many would agree. But Professor Sachs, give us on each of these 4 challenges 3 things politics should do here in Italy and in Europe. Just not to go home in total drama, because after all, we all want to participate in democracy. And so tell us, where should politics go from now on, here in Europe, in Italy and in the EU? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start with what I regard as very important for Europe. I edit 2 volumes every year that have an annual report. One is called the Sustainable Development Report, because I lead a global network of universities, 2,000 universities, working on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we report on the Sustainable Development Goals every year. How close or how far are different countries from achieving the 17 goals? The second volume that I edit, that I co-founded 14 years ago, is called the World Happiness Report. That is based on a survey taken each year by Gallup International. And Gallup International surveys 150 countries, 1,000 people in each country, and asks the following question, so you can answer it in your own minds. Imagine that life is like a ladder, and there's the 0 rung on the ladder, which is the worst life you can imagine, and it goes up to the 10th rung of the ladder, and that's the best life you can imagine. Where do you put yourself on the ladder? So people could say, I put myself on the 7th rung, or I put myself on the 8th rung, or I put myself on the 3rd rung. And then we average for each country the score, and we rank the countries. Okay? So on both of those annual reports, Europe is far and away at the top of the list of both reports. Europe is, without question, the region of the world closest to the ideals of sustainable development. That means prosperity, low poverty, high social equity, access to health care, to education, to other amenities, and addressing the environmental crises as well. And the European Green Deal is the exemplar of that. When you look at the happiness report, Europe is something like the top 18 of 20 countries in the reported level of, self-reported level of well-being. If you look at other indicators such as life expectancy, Europe is way at the top with a couple of additional countries. Japan has the highest longevity, I believe, still today, but it's basically Europe, which has very high longevity, well over 80, many years longer than in the United States, for example. And that's a very good single indicator of quality of life and of quality of governance, because to have a high life expectancy requires that people are meeting their nutritional needs, they have access to health care, they're not killing each other as they do in the United States, they're not self-poisoning each other as they do in the United States. There are not people living in extreme poverty as there are in the United States, and so forth. So our life expectancy is around 77.5 or 78, and in Europe, 84 years, for example. Okay, so Europe has the best living conditions in the whole world. It's true. It's objectively true. The main aim for Europe is we should protect and preserve this good life and help others to achieve it. That's the basic idea. But this is not the mood right now. And this is not the sense, and it's not the actual politics in Europe, which is getting worse, not better. So what is happening in Europe? In my opinion, Europe succeeded because it adopted a kind of ethos, which I would characterize as a social democratic ethos, more than any other place in the world. And it lived in that social democratic ethos after World War II until today. Those are the basic European institutions. That's the success side. The challenge side is twofold. One, Europe gave up its foreign policy about 20 years ago to the United States almost completely. It wasn't actually always like that. Europe had great independent voices. Willy Brandt, a very good example. Ostpolitik was not a US policy. It was a policy invented in Germany and pushed against US opposition to an important extent. And Brandt and Schmidt and Helmut Kohl all were people of stature and an independent voice. And one could name many such leaders in Europe. In my opinion, Europe doesn't have such leaders today that have an independent voice anywhere. I don't see any single leader in Europe with an independent voice right now of this stature and of this vision. And it's a very interesting question of what happened. But my view is that Europe subordinated its foreign policy to the United States completely, and for two basic reasons. One, the European Constitution, as it were, that is, the European Union does not really allow for a European-wide foreign policy yet. It's not there in the way that Europe operates. You cannot operate by unanimity in this world. If you operate by unanimity, you end up without functioning. The Liborum veto, as Poland discovered in 1792, is the route to extinction. It's not the way to govern. So one is Europe doesn't have the institution for a foreign policy. It operates by unanimity, which is impossible. And the second is that Europe, for all the reasons we know and discuss every day, subordinated the military to the United States. And rather than creating a real security apparatus after 1991, at the end of the Cold War, NATO became the defining security apparatus. This was a huge mistake for Europe. The alternative, the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, offered a completely different vision, in my view, of collective security, which included Russia and all the former Soviet republics, now independent states. And NATO should have been disbanded in 1991 when the Warsaw Pact was disbanded. You should have said bye-bye to the American military bases here and had a nice time. And you would have been a lot more secure than you are today. So for me, Europe lost its foreign policy, and it subordinated its economic policy to American foreign policy, because you can't really extract the economy from the foreign policy. So Europe has many technology leaders, for example. Europe is the home of the world's leader in semiconductor production, of course. ASML is a Dutch company, but who runs ASML? Who runs ASML policy? Entirely the United States. Europe has no say at all in where ASML exports or doesn't export. It may think it does, but it doesn't. And so Europe gave up its economic edge as well, except in one case, Airbus. You made Airbus to compete with the American airline producers. That was a very good thing. But in no other area was there a comparable European effort to create the scaled kind of technologies and enterprises. The only thing that came close, unfortunately, is basically defunct, and that is the German internal combustion automobile industry, which is the world's best, but of a technology of the 20th century, not of the 21st century. So Europe's economic base is also really compromised right now. And that is a big problem. So where is Europe in all of this? The Commission has been basically an arm of NATO, useless to my mind, and very sad, very dangerous. I have a completely different view, a voice against the tide, about the war in Ukraine and so forth. I take a completely different view from the mainstream. I think it's an American-caused war. I think the provocations are obvious. I think this war never would have happened but for a deep US attempt to break Russia into pieces. I know it from firsthand. I've been there for 30 years watching this. This is completely different from the European view that you're facing an expansionist Russia that's about to invade Paris. This is nuts in my view. But it became the narrative because, in my view, it's the CIA narrative. So it's not really the truth. It's just the propaganda that surrounds all of this. My experience is something completely different, which is that after 1991, the United States said we rule the world and we do what we want, and we expand NATO all the way to not only Ukraine and Georgia, but to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and we break Russia to pieces, by the way, because that was the explicit idea, not implicit, explicit, that just like the Soviet Union divided along its ethnic lines, Russia will divide along its ethnic lines. And we had strategists like Zbigniew Brzezinski who said Russia should divide into three parts: an Asian part, a European part, and a Central Asian part, and that this will be a weak confederation of three different, this is fantasy world of American military strategists. And the point, and I'll stop here, the point is, in 2008, Europe gave up its foreign policy. And it did it when, at the NATO summit in Bucharest, the United States insisted on inviting Ukraine and Georgia to NATO. And Chancellor Merkel was against it, and President Sarkozy was against it. And on the first day they resisted, and on the second day they gave in, and Europe never spoke again that I have seen of an independent foreign policy after the NATO Bucharest summit. Europe has simply followed the US. Now what's interesting is now we have a president who's got many, many crazy, outlandish, unacceptable ideas, but one idea he has is end NATO enlargement, which is actually a good idea. So, and what's Europe's reaction? No way, we continue the war. We arm, we will be at war with Russia by 2029. This is insanity. This is actually being said in Germany right now. So this is what I don't understand. Europe has lost the art of diplomacy. And my advice is, I'll tell you my specific advice. When President Costa came in to be president of the European Council, I gave him my personal advice. Fly to Moscow. Talk with President Putin. I said, I speak with Foreign Minister Lavrov quite frequently. You have a lot you can discuss. You should listen to the Russian point of view. You can negotiate about it, you can accept it or not accept it, but you should talk. So what happened, of course, as in 45 years of my advice, the opposite was done, usually, not always, but you know, he and President van der Leyen flew to Kyiv for the 100th time, not to Moscow for the first time. Well, you can keep going back to Ukraine all you want, but that's not going to make Europe safe. It's not going to end the war. It's not going to resolve any single problem. So, just to finish my point, and then I'll give you my practical advice. One, re-engage in diplomacy. Speak with the Russians. Continue good relations with the Chinese. Don't follow the United States' lead into a trade war with China. And take the off-ramp to the Ukraine war and make Europe safer this way. But speak to the Russians, and if you worry about, well, how do we know, Mr. Putin, you won't just go on to the Baltics? Ask him that question. Get an answer. Tell him why it's not acceptable, that answer. Give him a better answer. Come up with something. That's what's called diplomacy. Negotiate, discuss, brainstorm, come up with solutions. There's none of that right now. None. So this is the first point. Second point is use your European Green Deal to actually modernize the European economy. You've got all the universities, all the scientists, all the technologists that you could possibly dream. They're all here. So make a green digital Europe. And that's what the European Green Deal is about. And you've got the best agronomists, and you've got sustainable agriculture, and you've got farm to fork strategies. Great. Do this. Don't spend $800 billion on armaments. Make the modern economy. Europe, of course, should be either the lead or, together with China, the lead of sustainability. But it's nowhere around right now. It's very disheartening. I thought European diplomacy was going to be the European Green Deal would be the diplomatic lead for Europe in all parts of the world. It's nowhere to be seen now, any other part of the world. So this is the second point and I think Mario Draghi had many good ideas, by the way. So that was dismissed immediately, but there's many things in his study that are absolutely worthy. But Europe should have a European-wide strategy right now. I want to see European AI leaders. I want to see ASML as a European company. I want to see Europe making the fast rail in Africa, in Central Asia, not just China doing so. There are plenty of good things for Europe to do that would be very dynamic economically, very good for the world, but it's not happening right now. So those are very practical. And third, don't listen to the United States, please. You should say already, okay, we tried that for a long time. The US is not social democratic. It is corrupt, libertarian, and weird. It's extremely militaristic. It's rather dangerous. It's one-person rule. So please be Europe and lead with good, real values. So that's my recommendation.
Ecco il professor Petrella da Bruxelles.
No, non sono io il professor
A lei la parola, professore, non si sente quello che dice.
Non sono io Petrella, se sono io live non sono io Petrella. Avevo una domanda comunque. Mi sentite?
Sì. Connecting from Brussels. If you don't have on the screen, we go on.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we do hear you.
Yes, and I was saying I'm not Professor Petrella, so there's probably a mistake on who you linked up. My name is Lucio Pascarelli. I'm working with Roberto Savio and colleagues to establish the university. I'm an ex-UN, 35 years with the UN. I'm an IT guy, and I grew up in Asia. And I wanted to ask you a question. I saw your keynote in India a few weeks back, and both being there and both professionally, I've used extensively outsourcing, offshoring services to India. So I'm pretty much aware of what are India's strengths right now, particularly in the IT field, but also in all business process outsourcing. And I see a pretty potential intense conflict coming up with the features that AI, the kind of things that AI can do versus the services that India provides. So I wanted, and I fully agree that India is a very critical player in the world in the coming years, but I see a risk of AI infringing into some of the core services on which the Indian economy is based. So I want to have your views on that.
Thanks. So the question, there are many issues of this extraordinary and rapidly evolving technology, and they will become even more intense within a year or two when the new humanoid robots start to be commercialized, and that's about to happen. Sonia and I visited a robotics company in China just 2 weeks ago. It's very, very close. Think about your ChatGPT or DeepSeek inside the head of one of these things. and with tremendous dexterity and capacity to do work, to move, to do all sorts of human activities effortlessly, tirelessly, doing somersaults along the way, and with each of these robots having PhDs in about 18 areas because they have been given an hour to have a PhD level understanding in each of these areas. This is coming very soon. This is 5 years away, perhaps. Of course, the military has its eye on war-fighting robots, and we've had about 500 years of science fiction writing, from the Golem to Frankenstein's monster to Rossum's Universal Robots onward, telling us, to the Sorcerer's Apprentice, telling us that all of this is going to go very badly, and I think we can count on it. Something is there are some major unfulfilled challenges ahead in all of this. From an economist's point of view, it's an absolutely stunning question. What would it mean if we have AI empowered humanoid robots that can do essentially human work pretty much across the board in most areas? And I'll tell you, the answer is we have no clarity on this point in the academic scientific field of economics. There are a few attempts at some simple modeling, but there's no quantitative assessment of what this means in terms of jobs or income distribution or changing sectors of the economy. I find this very interesting as a macroeconomist, that this absolutely major technological upheaval that is obviously upon us is quite hard to understand in terms of its impacts on economic life. The best that one can gather is that the returns to human work will go down and the returns to capital will go up, because basically this is a substitution of smart machines for human work. And basically you would imagine that the wage level will go down as a result of this because of all of the jobs that are replaced. Your family robots will be a lot cheaper than raising your kids, okay? It will take you 30 years to raise your child to get a PhD. Your robot literally will have those skills in an hour. You won't have to feed the robot other than electricity, and that will be pretty inexpensive. And I'm being obviously a little bit facetious. I don't want to be misunderstood as being ghoulish, but economically, this is a very big deal. It leads to two extremely different kinds of visions of the future. One is where we are in a cornucopia or a golden age because, hey, everything can be produced. Machines produce machines and they produce the things we want, and we can go have coffee. And what better place to have coffee than Rome, and enjoy our day, because all the hard work is going to be done by robots, by the way, going to work in self-driving vehicles anyway, so you don't even have to take them, they'll get there themselves. And this will be the age of abundance. The other vision, of course, is a complete economic collapse, because there's no work anymore. There's only unemployment. There's gig labor, which is barely survivable. And maybe Elon Musk and Peter Thiel own everything in the end. And everyone else, if they work at all, they work for them. And there's no future, because if you go to try to sell your work, yeah, I'm an economist, but the robot is much better than I am. It just read 40,000 economics papers in the last 5 minutes and sampled the economics data in every county of the United States in real time in the last half hour. So what am I going to do? So that's actually a quite legitimate, scientifically possible vision as well. And I've written papers showing that the utopian and the dystopian versions of the future are both theoretically possible. Interestingly, at least in one simple version of this, the critical difference is the government. Because if the government owns the robots, in essence, and does the work on behalf of society, and there are other variants of this, then everybody lives well. But if it's left to the individual marketplace, then you may end up with a caste society of a few rich owners who pass their wealth down to their children, for example, and then impoverished people who have nothing to pass along. They don't earn anything, and there's nothing for them to bequeath. And so theoretically, both of these future visions are quite possible, and one needs a social order to arrive at the good outcome rather than the bad outcome. In the United States, we have no social order other than the Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Donald Trump social order. So we haven't heard one word in the United States, by the way, since January 20th, not one word literally about the well-being of poor people, either in the US or internationally. It's not part of the lexicon. It's not part of the discussion. It's not even faked anymore. You don't have to fake it anymore. All we hear is the world of power and the world of dominance. And so this is quite consistent with one of those paths that is quite possible in the future. I would rather that Europe actually had a role in this in the future, but you're not producing the robotics, you're not producing the AI. As they say, you're producing the regulations, but that's not going to be enough. So I want to see European champions that are actually making a European leadership role in this.
I am not an economist of your size, but I did study economics, and then I have a way to look, maybe in a more primitive way. But I think that the real impact of this coming world is that it destroys capitalism as we knew it. Because capitalism from the time of market was somebody producing something, putting on the market, selling, recovering the capital, and that from Middle Age expanded into having factories which were owned by people, so people did not own any longer the means of production, they became workers, and then other additions were made, like advertisement and distribution. Today, a product should not cost more than 12% in its production, because the other is going into distribution, etc. Well, this is going to disappear, because you do not have any longer distribution. A platform is a platform where the distribution is done in the platform. You do not need any longer channel of distribution. You do not need any longer channel of advertisement. And to be frank, you do not need any longer channel of production. We users become producers with our work. So this capitalism, as we did study myself in the last century, is finishing, it's becoming another world. And the elimination of that type of capitalism, for me, is bringing a new capitalism, which is based on the extraction from few people of health from data. And it's an extraction capitalism, which never existed at that level before. So what I'm worried about this is that capitalism, like it or not, was an instrument which produced wealth. And that is going to disappear. And I don't think this system which is coming will produce wealth to distribute. I don't believe in the utopian society because I think that capitalism is changing. So I may be wrong.
So very interesting observations. And I think that I would, let's put aside the word capitalism for a moment and just talk about physical production and its distribution. We will not have an end of physical production for the things that people need and the things that people want. And in a capitalist system, the ability to obtain the things that you want or that people want depends on their market power, their earning power, their wealth, and their income. There will be people who own the means of production, whether it is AI-empowered systems or factories or large farms, whether they have workers on them or not. Maybe they will all be robotic and automated. There will be people that own those. They will be extremely wealthy. They will live with a kind of abundance that is perhaps, well, is imaginable today because the people that own these technologies today are already with personal net worth of $200 billion, and their consumption is several 100-foot yachts and 10 homes and their airplanes and all the rest. Still, it's impossible actually to spend at the level of $200 billion, no matter what you do. But there is production, and they are the owners of those productive systems, and there is consumption highly unevenly distributed. What will happen in the future is that one of 2 points, as I said, that I think is correct. One is that the consumption could become even more unequal and concentrated. So you could have, in the midst of this unprecedented capacity to produce, people who are completely superfluous because they own nothing, they have nothing to sell, and they are viewed as liabilities in society. Because what are they? They have nothing. And in the utopian version of our libertarians in Silicon Valley, these are expendable people. And we have an entire pseudo-philosophy with truly a pseudo-philosopher, Ayn Rand, who created a fictional world in which the beggars and the takers are useless detritus of society, and they are to be left aside. People write manifestos in the United States today proclaiming this philosophy. This is literally the philosophy that governs much of Silicon Valley right now. They like the idea that the high morality is that they, as the creators, should be left alone to create, and that everyone else is simply a hindrance. That is actually a very popular view among powerful people in the US political system. Now that is an economic system that would still fall under the category of capitalism, and as it's usually defined, which is that there would be private ownership of production. The distribution of that ownership would depend on markets and on the distribution of private property, and it would be extraordinarily unequal, unprecedentedly unequal. But capitalism has been an exploitative, unequal system since its invention in the 16th century. At least international capitalism has been a profoundly exploitative system. So in this sense, I would say it's still capitalist, but of a particular characteristic, which is that it is a very dystopian direction. And America has been heading in that direction for the last 50 years, actually. We haven't had AI, but we've had a lot of automation. And in a society with a lot of automation, without a social safety net and without a social democratic ethos, you end up with a widening divide in society. And our divide is almost perfectly, it's not perfectly, it's very well defined between those who have university education and those who have a high school education. These are two completely different worlds that don't meet. The world of high school has had falling life expectancy, rising epidemics, rising addiction rates, falling living standards, and no political power at all. And the professional class has done rather well during this period. So we've already seen this kind of bifurcation. Trump's base is Trump's voter base is the working class, ironically, though he will do nothing for them at all. Zero, negative, nothing. It's all a complete shambolic misunderstanding and disaster. So he will accomplish nothing for the people that voted for him other than more misery. He will help the people who paid for his election, which is quite a different thing. And that will be the outcome of all of this. But the alternative, as I said, to put it very simply, is that if machines can produce machines and the machines can do everything that is needed in hard labor and physical construction and producing goods and services, that's a cornucopia if you use it properly. And that requires the intention to use it properly. And that's an ethical and moral and governance challenge, not a physical production challenge. So I still would insist that our godlike technologies give us the possibility for ending poverty, having healthcare everywhere, doing many wonderful things, if we took even a modest interest in doing that. In the United States, there is no political interest at all in that, in the ruling class, none. So that is quite interesting, and that, to my mind, gives an opening for Europe to do something good. But buying NATO weapons and planning for war with Russia does not fit that category.
Prego, seconda fila, terza fila. Lei?
Sorry for my English. I know it's not good, but I try to be understandable. Yes. First of all, I want to thank Professor Sachs because for his effort in giving us, I know he is in many places, and he tried to give another point of view in front of the mainstream about the wars, about the economical situation, about the economical wars also that we have to face in this moment. I would like to know what does it think about the possibility to have now the end of the war in Ukraine, and what does he think about the possibility to avoid the economical war in Europe with China that maybe Trump is going to ask to us? Thank you.
So very quickly, and I know we're coming to the end of the time, thank you for the question. The Ukraine war was caused by two fundamental points. One was that the United States and European leaders were happy to agree, wanted Ukraine on the Western side, and to not only have it on the Western side in economic terms, but also in military terms. The intention in the United States going back to 1994 was that the US military alliance would surround Russia, and that hopefully Russia would break apart under the pressure, or that the US would be able to overthrow the regime so that it was a subordinate regime to the United States. This was the idea. And the core of that was NATO enlargement, which Russia profoundly opposed. The second element of this war, obviously, is that Ukraine itself is a deeply ethnically divided country along the east-west geography. And so the eastern Ukraine is very long-standing part of the Russian Empire, and it's ethnically Russian, Russian Orthodox religion, Russian-speaking population. And the western part of Ukraine is Ukrainian-speaking and with a nationalist point of view, and dating back to the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, an anti-Russian point of view. So there's a nationalist West and a Russian ethnic East. And the Russians knew this was very explosive, but they were not trying to provoke an explosion. They were constantly saying to the United States, don't play with fire in this country. And Ukraine was succeeding in avoiding disaster as long as it was remaining neutral between East and West. And the United States hates neutrality. It contradicts the idea of being part of the U.S. hegemonic system. And the famous US line is either you're with us or you're against us. There's no such thing as neutrality in the US political lexicon. This is literally the case, by the way. The US hates neutral countries. Ukraine tried to be neutral after 1991, but the United States entered politics very actively in many ways in Ukraine to promote pro-US politicians. This is like in Italy also, by the way, after World War II. The United States ran a lot of Italian politics for a long time. Certain things were allowed, other things weren't allowed, but the United States did this in Ukraine starting in 1991, and it promoted actively pro-US politicians. I know many of them. I saw all of this pretty close up. In 2014, the United States actively worked to overthrow the president. Don't have any doubt about that. They call it the revolution of dignity. I call it a CIA-led regime change operation. That's what it was. Of course, many people wanted a change of regime, but the United States made it possible. It spent a lot of money to do it, by the way. And if you recall, February 21st, 2014, 3 European foreign ministers negotiated with Yanukovych that elections would come in 8 months and that in the interim there would be a unity government. The next morning, the US-backed violent insurgency took over the government buildings, declared a new government, and the US immediately recognized it. And Europe, because it has no independent foreign policy, immediately recognized the government that it had just signed an agreement a day before that it wouldn't do. So that's an example of Europe completely being used by the United States. Not even used. No one cares in the US about Europe, believe me. You're taken for granted. And Europe fell into line exactly on February 22nd, 2014, just as it was supposed to do, and it did. It forgot all about the agreement it had reached the day before. So these were the two issues. As soon as that coup happened, probably with Russia's support, but also quite independently, the two provinces of eastern Ukraine declared their autonomy. They said, we don't accept the coup. And that is the breakaway Lugansk and Donetsk. And they declared a People's Republic. Russia did not recognize them. What Russia said was there needs to be a peace agreement that gives autonomy to this region. What was the model for that autonomy, by the way? This is an interesting question for an Italian audience. The model literally was South Tyrol, Bolzano. Why do I say so? Because Mrs. Merkel was very familiar with South Tyrol, and she was instrumental in what became called the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements. It's actually modeled on Bolzano. Nothing wrong with Bolzano. What a great place. It's really worked well. And that was Mrs. Merkel's idea, that there would be autonomy for the two districts. You know what the United States said? We don't agree with that. Ukraine should be a unitary state. We don't accept federalism. We tell the Ukrainians, you don't have to implement the Minsk II agreement. And the Ukrainians, who were the US installed officials, said, we don't want to implement the Minsk II agreement. So these were the two causes of war: NATO enlargement and the failure to address the binationality of Ukraine, especially after a coup. in which the United States played an absolutely pivotal role. Europe was silent on this. Not a word. No responsibility. No maturity. Sorry. I like Mrs. Merkel, but she failed completely after 2008, after she was told we're going to go to NATO enlargement. She just fell into line with the United States, as did Sarkozy, Hollande, Macron, the whole pattern. Europe lost its voice, and then Scholz was pathetic, frankly. Pathetic. Not one word. He stood there as the president promised to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. And then when the US blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, couldn't say a word about it. It blew up the German economy. But that was all part of the course. So the question was how to end the war in Ukraine. Let me tell you, if at any moment the United States had said NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine, there would have been no war, period. None. As late as April 2022, Russia was not claiming any territory other than where their naval base is, other than Crimea. They were not claiming the Donbass. They were not claiming Zaporizhia or Kherson Oblast. They were saying, implement the Minsk II agreement. And Europe and the United States were, what do you mean? Why would we do that? And on April 15th, 2022, a draft agreement was put on the table for signing by the Russians and the Ukrainians to end the war 3 years ago now. And they were about to sign. There were still some issues to be resolved, but normal issues that diplomats resolve. How to define the security guarantees, what's the role of the United Nations, which countries are on the list. And the US told the Ukrainians, don't sign the agreement. We're going to kill the Russian economy with sanctions. We're going to supply HIMARS missiles and ATACMS missiles. Russia will be defeated. That man will leave power, said the United States. 3 years ago, 1 million casualties since then on the Ukrainian side, dead and severely wounded. And until today, no European leader other than Viktor Orban and Robert Fico says the truth about this, till today. And even now, Trump, who's oddly telling the truth because it's not his style, saying this was a war about NATO, the Europeans say, no, that's a lie. Of course it's the truth. So the war could end today. Not with a ceasefire. That's the whole illusion. Ceasefire has nothing to do with ending this war. A peace agreement ends this war. And the peace agreement is based on neutrality, number one. Unfortunately, now loss of territory, because after 3 years of war, it's not just autonomy anymore. These places were annexed in the fall of 2022, and Russia's not going to give them up after 3 years of war, period. And Ukraine's not going to win them back, by the way. They're not. And a security arrangement in the UN Security Council. These are the 3 points to end the war. Peace can do it. A ceasefire is irrelevant. The Russians say, ceasefire, what's that? We want fundamental answer. And they're completely right, especially given the history of how this war came about. They want to know, is NATO going to enlarge or not? Until today, all the Europeans say, yes, of course it's going to enlarge. You think you're going to have peace with Russia on that basis? You think NATO's really going to enlarge to Ukraine? Of course it's not. By the way, I'll tell you something interesting. A prime minister said to me a couple of weeks ago, Jeff, NATO's not going to enlarge to Ukraine. And I said to the prime minister, but you just said publicly that it's going to, which this prime minister had said. Yes, Jeff, I know, but it's not really going to. Do you think, Prime Minister, that it's really functional for your democracy to say something that you know is not the case? Oh, yes, but it's very hard for us to say the opposite. This is pathetic. That's not going to stop a war. So this is really the issue. I don't know whether the war will stop or whether the war will go on and Russia will conquer Ukraine and many more people will be dead, but it could stop today with honesty. And I would really recommend that Prime Minister Maloney, who's very skilled at these kinds of discussions, she should go to Moscow and talk and find out what's the solution to this. And she has the advantage that the people in Italy actually don't want the war, don't care about NATO enlargement. They're not some crazy British population, thank you. The British are nuts because they had 200 years of empire. So Starmer's crazy as far as I'm concerned, or an MI6 creation or something. But you're not. This is a very sensible country. And it actually likes peace and good coffee. Perfect. She should go to Moscow and talk to Putin. That's it. It would actually, she'd come back and say, you know, it's not so hard to end this war. We don't have to spend $800 billion. We actually have to address the root causes of this and the war would end. So that's my take. I know you asked me another question, but I think I went on far too long.
The last one, the lady in the last row.
Hi. Well, my name is Antonella Trocino. I'm an adjunct professor at Lewis University in financial economics. And there are several issues that I see, not only the 800 billion public fund for rearm, but even a new stream that is prevailing at European Federation of Banks, which is quite guided by Deutsche banks. And they are telling that funding arms is sustainable. So there is a big contradiction between the Green Deal that you quoted, where the EU should be the first group of countries toward a net zero economy, and this foolish idea that having a manufacture of brown arms in Europe is sustainable. So how is it possible to rise this contradiction between Green Deal and war? Thank you.
As you know, the first thing you learn in economics is guns versus butter. That was from Paul Samuelson, textbook 1948. You can choose the civilian economy or you can choose the military economy, but there's a trade-off. And the more of one means the less of the other. And we learned, it was for me 53 years ago, that diagram of the production possibility frontier, and on one axis guns and on one axis butter. So here we would put Parmigiana or something else. But the idea is absolutely clear. And there is a case, by the way, for buying Russia. I mean, Europe needs armaments. There's no question. Europe needs an army and it needs deterrence. And so I'm not a pacifist or I am a pacifist, but I'm not a unilateral disarmer. Europe needs an army. I think it would be much smarter for Europe to have the military production here rather than buying from NATO in the United States it's the same amount. You might spend it on a US system or a European system. I'd go for the European system because two reasons. One is that when the US holds the key, it also can turn off the key. And so US weapon systems are a control device over Europe. They are a direct loss, actually, of sovereignty to an important extent. Of course, Trump is first and foremost an arms salesman also. He wants Europe to spend more, but don't you dare think about spending it on your own military. This is absolutely a game from the US point of view, and the corruption around that is huge in the United States. This is a lobbying business, top to bottom. Our generals retire, they go to the military contractors, they make a lot of money, and they want Europe to buy all of these products. So this is just basically selling US arms. My point is something else, which is how much does Europe need to do for its security? A lot less than simply rearming. What Europe needs is very low cost diplomacy. That is the cost of a plane ticket, not a fighter jet. One plane ticket. So, yeah. So this is my main point. Europe lost all its diplomacy. There are no European diplomats. There are warmongers. Kaja Kallas is not a diplomat, not the way she's acting, not at all. She's Russophobic and a promoter of war. The absolute worst diplomat in Europe by far was Annalisa Baerbock, the German foreign minister under Scholz. Morning till night, she was promoting armaments, not peace. She never engaged a day in diplomacy that I saw. Diplomacy means you sit down with your adversary and you discuss, and that she never did. I was once asked to give a talk to the G20 foreign ministers. So I met all of them online, and their whole meeting was devoted to not having to shake the hand of Lavrov. So, so immature, it was unbelievable. Lavrov was in the room, but the whole drama was we won't have our picture taken with him. We won't shake his hand. This was the G7 saying this. So to my mind, you can't be secure without diplomacy, no matter how many weapons you have. If you only rely on weapons, you're going to end up in war because of what's called the security dilemma. What Europe is doing will look threatening to Russia. They will arm. That will look threatening to Europe. The spiral will end up in war. This is all of Europe's history, by the way. So diplomacy is the missing ingredient here, and it's the key to saving, I don't know if it saves 800 billion euros, but it certainly saves 700 billion euros. That would be my point.
Thank you very much. I think we all have to thank Jeffrey Sachs for the incredibly interesting things he told us tonight. We are perfectly aware that anybody who would say the same in Italy would be considered anti-American. So nobody writes these sort of things, if not really minor newspapers, and not so clearly and not so articulately. From my point of view of former ambassador to Moscow, I must say that I recognize an enormous lot of things you have mentioned. And I think that I share your views for the biggest part. Just one note about European armament markets. You have seen that when Germany decided to invest 100 billions 1.5 years ago, they immediately spent 65 of them buying F-35. So, which is strange, and probably Europe will spend an enormous amount of money buying American armaments. There is a practical problem. We don't have 6th-generation fighters, and it would take another 18 years before buying that. So that is a big problem that I wouldn't be able to solve, and I wouldn't be able to give an advice on how to overcome the next 10 years. I mean, for the 6th-generation fighter, it would need 18, but also for having another kind of armament, so we should work at least 10 years. We could go on talking indefinitely because the subject is really very interesting, but we could go on taking advantage of the buffet our host is offering on the other room. So I think that we could simply get up and move and go to the dinner that our guest is offering to us. So thank you very much to Jeffrey, and let's have a big applause for him. I have to tell you something about